George Hemingway is up next. I often refer to George as a futurist. He doesn't refer to himself that way, but he has this ability to kind of see where things are going and where this industry needs to be going. And he is one of the most powerful orators, I think, that you're going to come across. So, but I'm not going to go on about George. I'm going to leave that to Blair. I'm going to introduce a relatively newer member to our Northern Miner team, who is Blair McBride. He will introduce George properly and sit down and have a chat with him. Blair is the production editor for the Northern Miner. His first exposure to mining journalism was a few years ago when he worked at the Northern News Services in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. Talk about getting some street cred. Anyone that comes from the NWT has immediate street cred in the mining business. He regularly reported on gold and diamond projects and other mining developments in the territory. He also worked as a journalist in northern British Columbia and Bangkok, Thailand. He's a graduate of Western University's Masters of Arts in Journalism. And it's a pleasure to welcome to his first appearance on the Global Mining Symposium. Hello, Blair. How are you? Oh, Blair, you are on mute.
Can you see me now?
Yeah, there you are.
All
wonderful.
Right.
Welcome,
Hello.
Blair. How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're having a lot of fun. We're looking forward to this discussion. I'll pass it over to you, and you can give George more of a proper introduction.
Great. Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. So George Hemingway is managing partner and leads the innovation practice at Stratalis, where he advises the leaders of companies and organizations and countries on the future and how to succeed in uncertain times. Through his work, he has collaborated with the world's leading industrial and mining companies, ranging from Vale to Teck, BHP to BASF, to set their future visions and reimagine what is possible and transform their businesses, especially in the most challenging areas such as greenhouse gas reduction, tailings, safer mining of the futures, and the like. George is considered one of the leading futurists in the mining industry, and his work has won numerous awards, including SME's Robert E. Murray Innovation Award, and has delivered over 100 keynotes at global forums ranging from NASA to the World Mining Congress. In addition to corporate boards, he is passionate about supporting the next generation of leaders as a board member to the Chamber Orchestra of New York, Mark Aerospace, and the Lassonde Institute of Mining at the University of Toronto. He holds an MBA from Columbia Business School and a Bachelor of Science from the Stern School of Business at NYU. So I guess I'll just head into my questions now.
Hello, Blair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right.
Okay.
Nice. Thank you for having me today.
Great. All right. So you might have heard, and we've been talking about this a bit today, about how young people have low interest in mining as a career. So if I might self-reference a little bit, I did a recent story for the Northern Miner, and I cited a poll conducted by Abacus Poll and the Mining Industry Human Resources Council, the MIHR, that showed only 11% of 3,000 youth polled said they would be likely to work in mining. It also found that 70% of those polled definitely or probably would not consider going into mining. And other sectors like healthcare, high tech, and the arts ranked higher for preferred careers. So that in itself doesn't seem very encouraging for the industry, but it looks even worse when we contrast that with a report from the MIHR in 2020 that said the mining industry in Canada would need almost 80,000 new hires between 2020 and 2030 to replace workers retiring. So we have this declining interest while we also have the demand for people in mining rising. This seems kind of dire. So my first question for you is, what should we make of all this?
Well, I mean, I think it's absolutely real. We've been doing similar type of work, and I think I looked at something more broadly that said 40% of the workforce was looking to leave their jobs in 2023 alone. And another quarter of them are going to leave in the next 5 years, and another quarter or so are planning on leaving the industry altogether. So it's very similar, type of data that you've shown. And I think that, one of the big challenges is that despite this need, despite the fact that companies are making more and more money, you can't just throw money at the problem. I think it's not a universal truth, but COVID has caused a lot of people to take a fresh look at why they do what they do. You see it in the Great Resignation. You see it in people changing cities. You see it in people changing getting divorced, getting married. It's almost as if we're having some sort of global midlife crisis. And that challenge is facing all companies. Mining is not the only one, but mining is not immune. And so I think that people need a reason to be. They need a reason to wake up in the morning. They need a reason to work. They need a reason that is more than a paycheck. They need a why. They need not just what they do, but they need to understand why they do what they do. And I mean, if you think about it, right? Why are you here? Why am I here? Are you here because you have to be, or are you here because you want to be? If no one was watching, would you still be here? The truth is that a lot of folks, given the choice in the work that they have today, are relatively discontent. And that discontent is something that stretches not just to their work, it stretches across the world that we're in right now. We've all been locked up for a couple of years. And we're seeing that discontent, with society and with work and with labor sort of coming out in a lot of different ways. I mean, we've seen it for years, really. If you think about it, it was Tahrir Square, and you see it in Occupy Wall Street. You see it in the last couple of years with Black Lives Matter. You see it coming up right now with people protesting against the 1%. You see it in everything. You see it even in the rise of populism in Trump's and Bolsonaro's and the like, or the rise of socialism. You see people are generally discontent. And if you're not the half of society that gravitates towards what is secure, like tradition or family or religion or work, you're the half that tends to protest these things. And because of that discontent, people are looking for answers, or they're looking for scapegoats. And big businesses like mining, like automotive, like aviation, like pharmaceuticals, like banking are very much in the crosshairs. So until industries, and in our particular case, mining, can effectively communicate the value of what we do, our purpose, and connect it in a real way to the needs of the next generation and the existing generation, and what matters to them, I think we're going to continue to see this sort of challenge. And doubly so in industries like mining that are exceedingly provincial businesses, living in a world that is no longer communicating in provincial ways. Everything is seen. Anything that can be seen can be judged. Anything that can be judged can be canceled. And mining is no different. So something fundamentally has to shift in the communication and the equation.
Right. I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. I do want to come back to what you said about the communication, but I do have a little follow-up question there for you.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, as someone who focuses on uncertainty in the industry, is there another way for us to look at the industry trends that I outlined when I started? Sure.
There's always an opposite. There's always another way of looking at a challenge, and let's face it. As much as we're in a panic right now, it's funny. I was listening to the last talk, right? And Anthony was saying thesis and antithesis, and antithesis. That's it. And talking about ESGs and the like, and folks being sued down in the United States, and it's interesting. As much as we're in a panic right now, I think everything will eventually work its way out. So, I mean, 3 years ago, we were all in our offices complaining about being in our offices. A year ago, folks were still hunkered down, wondering how you're ever going to get out of COVID. Now we're learning to live with COVID and its little furry variants. And the majority of people have moved on. So we're remarkably resilient. Companies are remarkably resilient. And regardless of the fact that we're now looking at this labor challenge as being something that is a unstoppable force hitting an immovable object, I think it will, as the market always does, balance its way out. I think one of the things that we've had a lot of is good times. And we've had, China growth. We've had a relatively strong economy, at least, and relatively is the important word. And I think it's going to come to an end. People as a whole tend to underestimate how quickly change happens. And the same happens with technology. They tend to underestimate how quickly any one technology will mature and overestimate how long it'll take to make an impact. And that's why 10 years ago, the mining buzz was around mechanization and automation and robotics and AI and how it was all going to take our jobs and how people would be protesting. And it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet because technology takes a long time to mature, but it takes a very short time to adopt, even in an industry like mining when it really reaches a level of maturity in the top of the S curve that matters. So I think that what's going to happen is we're actually going to need less of the people that we think we need in the jobs that we think we need them in. And more people are going to be needed in jobs where we don't yet realize we're going to need them in. And what's interesting about that is that the mining industry currently right now is competing for a lot of these high-tech, high-smart, divergent thinking, collaborative jobs with the tech industry, which, by the way, if you haven't noticed, isn't doing that great this year. So if you look at it, a lot of the jobs we think we're going to need, we're not going to need. A lot of the jobs we are going to need and can't get a hold of are going to suddenly become available. But the real challenge in all of that will be, even if you have the right people, even if you have the right technology, are you actually going to be able to transform with those people? And I think the answer of whether the industry is going to be able to do that is very similar to the answer of whether the industry is going to be able to recruit the people it needs. And that's whether it's able to connect to them in a way that matters to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you for a couple more specifics on that. You said that the jobs that we think we'll need, maybe we won't, and others down the road we will.
Yeah.
Can you spell that out a bit more?
Yeah, I'll spell it out exactly. I mean, so you look at something like a traditional job, like someone that's doing bolting, right? Someone that's doing ground support and working at the face and clearing out lifter holes and inserting PVC tubes and scaling, or handling mesh and applying it. A lot of those jobs that are sort of traditional, what people think of as mining and production, I think are going to fundamentally shift. I think they're going to shift to either tele-remote or full autonomy, or they're going to be run from a different kind of place. And I think one of the interesting challenges about that is it's not just the work itself that's going to get different. It's the fact that people are going to need to collaborate in ways that they haven't needed to collaborate before. So as an example, that is not blue collar based, right? But that is more white collar based. You look at the issue of something like tailings management, right? And the long-term requirement to reduce the overall risk associated with tailings, the provision associated with tailings for social reasons, for financial reasons, you name it. I'm not even going to bother going into them because most of your audience understands that. Now, in order to do that, traditionally, you'd have someone that managed tailings. You have an individual in a business that was a silo that was doing that. But effectively, managing tailings means going way, way back into the mining process and understanding how you break, how you process, what you do with it after you've processed it. And then it requires you to go further downstream as well and look at how you do closure and how you do long-term legacy asset management. The kind of collaborative mindset that's needed isn't necessarily the kind of collaborative mindset we've hired for. We hire people and have for years not to be Renaissance thinkers, but to be experts at what they do. You're a financial analyst, so we make you controller. You're a controller, so we make you head of finance. You're head of finance, so we make you CFO. And then someone makes you CEO and you don't know a darn thing about anything except finance. And so I think it's not just those blue collar jobs, but it's that white collar collaborative thinking and that mindset of hiring people with that mold that is going to become one of the challenges as well. And that'll also be one of the things that I think we're not fully prepared for.
Right, yeah. So going back to the story I wrote, a factor that was cited by some of the younger people I spoke with for my story is that many youth are deterred from mining by its reputation, however accurate that is, of mining being a dangerous and environmentally destructive industry. In fact, I just had 2 conversations with people over the past couple of weeks who said that expressed that exact idea to me.
Yeah.
So in general, how is the mining industry doing in addressing that perception, however true or false it is?
I think the mining industry, and I put that in quotes for a second because I want to talk about it. a little bit more deeply, I think the mining industry, especially the big miners, are trying to do the right things, right? They're advertising, they're messaging. I even think in Australia, there was a kind of cool campaign, around, what would happen to a world without mining, and airplanes disappear and stuff like that. And that's kind of nifty, and that's helpful, right? But I think that while the industry as a whole isn't just sitting back and waiting for showstoppers to happen, they're out there saying the right things. But the challenge is that good messaging and good advertising are only one part of the equation. And they're the part of the equation, I think, that works better with regulators. It works better with governments, may help you even a little bit with recruiting. But I think it doesn't move the needle quickly enough in the area that really matters, which is in getting people to trust the mining industry and to share its purpose and to believe that it's something that matters to them and that they would like to be allied with. I was listening yesterday. I happened to be in Denver today at a conference, and I was listening yesterday to a gentleman, and he was saying, "I don't know about you." He was saying on stage, he was saying, I don't know about you, but when people ask me what I do, I pause for just a microsecond, and I wonder, is this a safe space? Can I tell them I work in mining? And this guy is an executive, is C-level of one of the big mining companies, right? So I think when it comes to moving the needle in sharing a purpose and a trust, you can't leave it to the mining industry to do that. And when I mean the mining industry, I mean the big companies. People don't trust industry bodies and corporations to tell them the truth. And even if they believe you, it doesn't resonate in a way that's authentic and moving and matters. And it doesn't help that the industry itself doesn't speak with a single voice anyway, because oil sands have nothing to do with diamonds. Potash has nothing to do with lithium. Base metals miners try their best to make sure that you ignore the fact that they once had coal assets. And the only thing that brings them together is the fact that the world lumps us together as taking stuff out of the ground. I think what has to happen for the mining industry to change its perception with people that it needs to join it is it needs a different kind of movement, and the voice that speaks on behalf of the industry as an advocate for the industry has to come from a different place. It has to come from us, the individuals, sharing our own personal stories. And I think that's one of the things that has to happen.
Could you give some examples of companies or initiatives that are going in the right direction in that regard?
In mining? It's an interesting question. I struggle with that one in mining. I have to be really, really frank with you. Because I can't think of a single company that actively encourages its employees to go out in the community and share their own personal stories, their own personal why they are in mining. There are some companies that do it in very interesting, specific ways. Not exactly the same thing you're talking about. And I'll pause for a second and throw Agnico into the mix. They're quite good, for example, at more transparently communicating with their investors, even letting them speak to their mine managers when they visit and so forth and so on. And I found that was quite compelling in how they engage with communities and how they engage with investors. I think in mining, no, I can't really give you a good example. I can give you a good example outside of mining. Companies, that are really good at getting people to advocate for them are companies that are able to connect what they do in a specific way to stuff that matters to us. So popular example of that might be Apple or Tesla, right? And Tesla's one of my favorites because if you think about it, people tattoo Tesla on their arm. There's no greater advocate for Tesla than you or I or your neighbor, despite Elon Musk. They still have this magnificent brand halo as if they take something that's essentially almost a commodity, right? A cell phone. And they manage to make you feel as if they are not just insulating their brands, but doing something good for humanity at like the exact same time. And the irony is, right, that these are two companies that need the metals and the minerals that mining provides almost more than anybody else. But what they've done somewhat successfully is they managed to draw this thin green line between their solar panels and their tunnel boring machines and their cars and their flamethrowers and whatever the hell else they sell, and the stuff that goes into it. So what they're trying to do, I think, is build goodwill and trust by broadcasting a higher purpose, a purpose that resonates with us in such a way that you and I go out and it'd be like, you know, they've got the coolest new iPhone, and because of it, I'm somewhat cool. Or they tattoo Tesla on their arm, or whatever the heck it is they do. And so I think that is what the industry somehow needs to do. And it's a movement that's going to have to happen. Well, it really is a grassroots movement in a way, but it has to be something that comes in many ways from the companies themselves, turning us into advocates for the industry. Make sense?
Yes, yeah, that does make sense. Could you be more specific about where the industry could be doing a better job with its public perception? I'm thinking, for example, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I'm just going to say, like, it is a fact that mining is extractive, and a lot of people, that's all they need to know. Their mind is closed at that point. How do we get past that? How can we? What are some? How could there be a better job with the public perception of that?
Well, I mean, I think I've touched on it a little bit. You're right. Mining is extractive by its very nature. It's not sustainable, right? And so at some point, right, eventually, for any one commodity, I guess mining has to stop because we will eventually run out of it, right? I think that the way that the public perception can be changed for mining industry is by taking the focus, ironically, off of mining. And I think that one of the biggest challenges is that when we sit inside and we speak with ourselves, we have this sort of echo chamber that exists. You know, we're like, well, of course, we're good for the world and we're doing the right thing and we matter. But the truth is that it really doesn't matter so much that we speak to ourselves as much as it matters that we speak to others. We have to get everyone to understand why they matter. Look, I'll give you an example. If you take someone that works in GHG reduction in a mining company, tracking their MAC curve and tracking energy usage and all that, you could say that they are an energy analyst. And that's great. That's what they do. But you ask them, what's the good they do for society? Why do they do it? Well, someone that is reducing GHGs is protecting the planet. Someone who is working in tailings isn't just monitoring, you know, for static liquefaction or piezometers. They are protecting communities. Someone that is working underground in seismicity as a geotech is saving an operator's life. And getting people to understand why what they do is so critical, I think is important. And then it comes the tricky bit, because GHGs and tailings and, you know, geotechs for seismicity, that's easy, right? But does the person in procurement understand that why what they're doing is bettering the world? Does the person in digital that builds a little app that brings the scoop so that you know what time, you know, at what point the rocks are showing up in place, do they understand why what they do matters? I don't think we do a good job at all of helping people bring that message out. And mining is way more important than what Tesla or Apple does. It's more important than cell phones. It's more important than cars. It's a fundamental thing that drives the world. It's like agriculture or medicine. A farmer doesn't just grow corn, they feed the world. And everyone that works in farming, whether they're buying fertilizer or milling, knows that what they do, it's a halo. A nurse doesn't deliver drugs, she's saving lives and healing. And that halo, that purpose, that understanding of what we do is less important than why we do it, is something that we need to cultivate as an industry. And if you will, you know, that's something that the medical industry, despite it's not pharma, but medical in general, doctors or agriculture, does really well. And frankly, mining doesn't.
So you mentioned purpose, and this links links well with my next question for you. So another factor that came up in my interviews is work-life balance for millennials and the so-called Great Resignation, and that mining companies should be making more effort to accommodate young people. So for example, shifts of 2 weeks on at a mine and then 2 weeks off, it can turn people off who want to raise a family or people who don't really like being out in remote areas.
Yeah.
And that's understandable. But at the same time, maybe the industry is missing a chance to recruit young talent by not being flexible enough with working conditions or compensation packages or what have you. So how do you think companies should deal with that? What have you seen in your work with companies changing the way they try and recruit and retain people?
So I think that the last year, right, is a bit of a wild, weird anomaly, and we don't quite know where it's going to shake out. So, but even taking that into account, more broadly to your question, I think that the curious thing is you say it's hard to recruit people for fly in, fly out, and you have to compensate them more and so forth and so on. And I want to deal with that in just a second. I think giving people more flexibility to feel like they matter and what they do matters is important. And one of the concepts that we've sort of seen, and you used to see it a lot with high performing leaders, right? You would take someone that you thought was going to be an XC or an SVP or an EVP or something like that, and you would allow people to float from one type of work to another to get a more diverse set of skills than they would have had in the past, to understand a little bit more, the industry that they're in, the work they do, the company they're in, and to feel like they're sort of adding value. And I think emphasizing, what people do and why it matters, and emphasizing both purpose and belonging. So why what you do matters, and the fact that you're part of a team that's bigger than just your little silo, is one of those things that has to go hand in hand. And I think really great corporations that do that have a way to make people feel like everything they do matters, not just to the organization, but to each other. And so I think from a recruiting point of view, giving people a broader runway, a chance to try a diverse set of skills, to move around, to feel like they're part of a bigger team, is one of the things that companies are doing in order to recruit. And this apart from all the standard stuff, which you've got to onboard people well and mentor them well, and you've got to pay them well and so forth and so on. I think when it comes to things like fly in, fly out, it's interesting because the people that I know that do fly in, fly out are all women, all under the age of 35 or 40, all really kind of adventurous types, and they love it. They love the concept. But there are parts, especially related to sort of diversity and safety, and making a more congenial atmosphere for people to feel like fly in, fly out is a place they would want to be, especially more diverse groups. That I think is an issue that isn't fully addressed. In fact, it's not properly addressed well enough. And so I think those are, if you will, that's my approach in it. And happy to speak on that second one a little bit more if you like.
Well, could you identify some leaders in that effort, or give some examples of the things they're doing that is speaking to that, and like you said, making people feel valued in their recruitment?
Yeah. So I mean, there are some companies that you easily could rise to the top of the pile because they are purpose-driven or even mission-driven enterprises, right? Places like Patagonia. And that's kind of easy because those companies attract a certain individual that resonate with that mission. And so because of that, they do a particularly good job with retention. They're quite flexible with their people and so forth and so on. But then you have companies that oddly you wouldn't think belong on the list because they wouldn't come to you like top of mind as folks that are doing a decent job with this. Companies like BlackRock, companies like, I guess consulting is a tough business, but nonetheless, Accenture and the like, who are doing a better job, I think, of recruiting folks who share a purpose, who share a certain culture, who are more open to a diverse and a collaborative type of workforce, because these are places where collaboration is sort of key. And they're attracting people who, yeah, want to make money, sure. It's really important because you can't take that away from the coin. People are always like, well, we have a recruiting problem. Well, you pay 20% less than everybody else. Why don't we start with that? Because about 65% of people leave their job because they're not paid enough. As much as we like to be, well, tell me what to do except to raise the cost of, raise what we pay. Well, okay, can I start with that? But, if you ignore that and you're playing parity, then attracting people, giving them a workplace where they can collaborate, giving them a workplace where they feel not just a sense of purpose, but a sense of belonging. I think these are companies that are doing a pretty decent job of that. And then you have bits of pieces of certain companies where you see that come to life. I have seen that come to life in parts of BHP, for example, right? There are groups within BHP led by certain people that build that kind of camaraderie, and folks are gravitated to that. But overall, you really have to ask at a company-wide level. You see less and less of it, I think, in the mining industry itself. And part of that is what I've discussed: a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a sense of seeing a future, of understanding a why, and that path to be able to say, well, yes, you may be a geotech, but that's not the only way. Up tomorrow, we're going to put you somewhere else so you can learn the entire mining business as a whole. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes. I want to switch gears a bit and turn to the issue of diversity, which has been mentioned several times today as well.
Yeah.
So diversity, and that mining needs to attract more people of color, indigenous people, and women. And as an example, the MIHR found in a 2022 report that on education that women made up only 16% of undergraduate mining engineering enrollments between 2016 and 2020. So, I mean, today, this is 2022, it's not 1972. Society has changed a lot. Most companies, if not all, believe in diversity and want a more diverse workforce. But the question is, are they doing enough to build up that diverse workforce? How do you see that issue?
So, I mean, let me ask a bit of a wicked question. You said that mining needs to build up more diversity and more people of color and more women. And so I would ask the question back to the mining industry, do you really? And why? So if the answer is, well, because everybody says so, and that's what the world looks like, and if we don't do it, we're going to get in trouble, and I submit to you that that is the answer deep down that a lot of people have, then that's a bit of a challenge. It's a bit of a challenge because you don't actually understand the value of diversity. You don't actually understand the value of different thinking. So I just look at the word diversity itself. There's one thing that someone is indigenous, or someone is Black, or someone is a woman, or whatever the case may be. Choose your definition of diversity as you like. But actually understanding and respecting how those opinions and different ways of thinking and different cultures and different points of view actually add value, that's a little bit tougher. So, and again, mind you, mining industry, right, as much as I may be like, well, does mining understand it, is really no different in many ways than many other industries. We could have a very similar conversation on, steel milling, or, locomotives and transportation, or shipping. But first, having that understanding that people with diverse thoughts, different thinking, different points of view can actually add value to how you work and how you improve and the kind of company you are, and actually codifying what the heck that actually means and bringing that to life is something that most companies don't do well. We have a hard time collaborating between the geotechs and the long-range planning and the operations and the strategy people, let alone bringing in people that wouldn't naturally even look like the communities that we grew up in where the mine is. So first things first is that companies need to actually understand, codify why diversity adds value. And I think the next thing they have to do, as I mentioned, is you've got to be able to attract what is that more diverse group that is coming up through the ranks by giving them a reason why your industry is an industry that appeals to them deeply. And then the third thing is you have to make it safe to be diverse. And it's an interesting thing. I had a conversation with a lady who worked on site for years, was fly in, fly out. That's mostly her whole career before she pivoted to corporate yesterday. And what she said was, you have to make it more difficult to do the wrong thing than it is to do the right thing. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit. She had a much cleverer way of saying it than I do. But that is true. You know, she was telling me a story that she worked on site, and we were with another woman at the time, was one of 800 people at a camp, and one of the only expat women. And you know, one of the things that was interesting is that, you know, they couldn't get facilities, you know, washrooms for the female. So this is an individual, and again, we're not talking like 40 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. This is now. That literally had to go use the men's washroom until men were uncomfortable enough to say, you know what, maybe we should get a women's washroom. That's not the way it has to be. You have to have a situation where, from leadership down, people are actively going out of their way to make it an equal and level playing field, not just in promotion and stuff like that, but simply in those cultural things where people don't just feel a purpose or what they do, but they feel a sense of belonging in that place. And it's equally important that, and a lot of the conversation you have, right, is you have, you know, women in mining coming together, working together, very important, men who are advocates for them. But I think it's important to not just be an advocate, but to be an activist. You know, you've got to be an active advocate for someone. You have to go out of their way, you know, to actually say, am I putting myself in their shoes? And how can I help promote these individuals and their needs? And I think until that happens and we have a level playing field, I think it's going to be challenged to attract a more diverse set of individuals.
Yes, good stuff. Thank you for that. And you took the words out of my mouth with what you said about the diversity of thought versus so-called diversity, and what the goal really is.
Yeah.
I guess my last question for you, if I have time, is which companies, which initiatives stand out in that regard?
I mean, again, I think I touched on a couple of them, right? Especially from outside the industry. I think there is one thing that I want to point out. I think that you are seeing more and more companies who are advocates for diverse groups within the mining industry. Apart from the folks that are outside the mining industry, the Royal Banks of Canada's, the BlackRocks, the Patagonias, and so forth and so on. I think you are seeing more and more of that, and you are seeing more and more, not just women, but broad, diverse groups being willing to speak up for themselves and to have a voice at events, to have a voice more broadly communicating with folks in the industry. I have some hope. I have hope that these groups are stronger than any kind of adversity. I have hope that the generations that come and those that are advocates for them grow stronger every day, and those that don't feel that way eventually retire. And I have hope because despite living in New York City, which is not, by the way, in case you didn't know, the home of the mining cheer crowd. My daughter comes up to me a couple of weeks ago, and I say, "Hey, hon, what are you?" She's 15. "What are you thinking of doing? You know, have you thought about career?" And she said, "Well, I'm kind of thinking of being an engineer." "Oh, that's interesting." "What kind of engineer?" "Well, you know, you're on the phone, Dad. Maybe a mining engineer." I said, "Well, why that?" I said, "Well, it kind of seems like an interesting place. Plus, it sounds like they could use a little bit of help." So I have hope, you know, and for all of the negativity and all of the, you know, sort of the down stuff we talk about, let's bear in mind that, you know, we're focusing on the negative in order to improve it. The stuff that we do, and it's great stuff, and that's why I'm in this industry, it's why you're in this industry, is remarkable. There is so much that matters, and never before has understanding, you know, what matters about what we do and why what we do matters been more important than it is now. And it's up to us to go out there and communicate it, not just in forums like this, but in forums mining doesn't naturally come up.
So well said.
Thank you for
Listen,
that.
we are up against it, but what a great note to end on. What an excellent conversation. Blair, George, wonderful to see you. We thank you for joining us. There's always so much food for thought there. I think ending on that personal advocacy thing that all of us can do, it has such profound ripple effects when we start to feel proud about what we do and realize its importance. One thing, George, I did want to just say to you, and maybe get a little more color on it. You're so right when you say about how we talk about this industry is all kind of backwards with our holes in the ground and big trucks. I mean, we've been guilty of it with the Northern Miner as well. In the past, we used to go to shows with these big holes in the ground. And I was saying, it came to me like, you brought up agriculture, the food industry. I mean, would not the equivalent be if you were selling in the beef industry? You sell the picture of a wonderful steak. You don't sell the slaughterhouse. You don't sell the cow being butchered.
Right.
But we kind of are doing that as an industry.
Right.
I mean, is this, you're out there, you're an advocate, you're connecting with executives, you're driving them forward. Is the message resonating? Are we seeing a shift at all on this?
With mining company executives or with the industry outside of mining, Anthony?
With mining company executives.
So I think with mining company executives, yes, absolutely yes. So I mean, you speak to folks, and it doesn't matter if it's Vale or BHP or Tech, whatever the case may be, Agnico. I think you get people that believe this. Executives believe this. They want to make it happen. But they're constantly challenged, of course, by market reality. So the speed of our ambition, or the strength of our ambition, does not often match the speed of our transformation. But I do believe the message is resonating, and it's challenging for someone like yourself as well, Anthony. You know, the fact that you create forums like this allow these conversations to happen, but fundamentally, you have to ask yourself, what do people want to read? What do people want to hear? Right? And I think, and I could be wrong, you're the one that has the numbers. I think there is a generation up and coming, and even here, that is more and more interested in these topics that don't necessarily have to do with, you know, how you fracture rock, and more have to do with how you change minds. Yeah. And it's just a question of time.
Absolutely well put. George, thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you participate in any of our forums. You're such a great contributor. Blair, wonderful job with the questions. I hope you enjoyed your first time on the Global Mining Symposium, and we thank you.
Yeah, it was good.
Thank you, everyone.
Not quite as nerve-wracking as I expected.
George makes it easy on people. Thank you both. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.